Let me take you through a revelation which we found out with regard to the power supply or from something to do with the Sri Lanka Electricity Board in the country. Let me take you back to early this year, the 21st of January. The Sri Lanka Electricity Board called for tenders, which they call as supplementary power purchases of 100 megawatts through a paper advertisement. So this happened on the 21st of January. A day after that, 22nd only, they seek cabinet approval for this. So generally, prior to advertising, the cabinet approval should be obtained. However, this was not the case, and the cabinet approval was obviously granted. But then later on, this was highlighted by Newsfirst, of course, on the 28th of January, the subject minister withdraws this tender. Moving on, 6th of March, the minister tells the country that there is no requirement to purchase emergency power from the private sector. Come the 13th of March, with the backdrop of all of these things happening earlier, where they requested to purchase additional power, the Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka asked the Sri Lanka Electricity Board, was there a requirement to purchase additional power? In January, however, there was no response given by the Sri Lanka Electricity Board for this particular letter. Let me take you to the 17th of March, where most of us, you and I, experienced power outages in the country the night of the 17th of March. So by the 25th of March, again, the Sri Lanka Electricity Board seeks approval from the Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka to purchase 100 megawatts of power. So everyone has been experiencing an outage during this time, and the situation had got worse by the 29th, and considering this situation, the PUCSL grants approval. Generally, when approval is being called for, there is a competitive bidding method where 100 megawatts will be purchased from 3 bidders, and it will obviously be awarded for the lowest bidder. Now, in the meantime of this approval of the PUCSL, they extend an expired agreement which happened in 2016 and purchase additionally 70 megawatts of power. So altogether there's 100 megawatts of power plus another 70 megawatts of power. A week after this, all towards the later part of March, a company from Turkey writes to the subject minister, Rabi Karanaika, directly stating that they have 2 ships with 200 megawatts of power each. And by the 11th of April, this is where the story gets quite interesting. The Sri Lanka Electricity Board officers and the minister held discussions, and they state that if they are to provide electricity uninterrupted power supply for the country for the next 6 months, they should purchase 470 megawatts of power. So if you refer to what I've told earlier about this 470 megawatts, there is something interesting. There is a company from Turkey which has 200 megawatts of power, so 2 ships each, which adds to 400. Apart from that, they also purchase electricity of 70 megawatts additionally from expired agreements, which they should have not done. So if you combine these two, it will come to 470 megawatts of power. So let me just keep that thought with you for now. Moving on that same day, on the 11th of April, the subject minister writes to the Prime Minister stating that they have to purchase this 470 megawatts of power without going into competitive bidding, stating that there is a national calamity. So generally, according to the Electricity Act of Sri Lanka, the 43rd clause, if we have to purchase electricity without going to competitive bidding, the cabinet has to declare that this is a national calamity. Taking this into account, the Prime Minister on the same day sends an observation to the cabinet to declare a national calamity. Now, accordingly, to purchase 470 megawatts of power on the 20th of April, the cabinet does not grant approval and says for the purchase of 430 megawatts of power. However, 6 days after that, 26th of April, once again, they request to purchase 200 megawatts of power. And by the 30th of April, Mr. Rabi Karanaika presents an amendment to this approval, which is very, very interesting. The amendments rather states that the 2 ships of the Turkey company should be able to import heavy fuel oil, which will result in of not paying a tax revenue to the treasury. So that's one. The second thing would be this particular company from Turkey will be exempted from tax. And if so, if the Turkey company has to pay any sort of tax, the Sri Lanka Electricity Board will have to bear that cost. Additionally, this agreement stands that if the dollar rate does not change, which means if it is 180 rupees per dollar, in the event the dollar rate fluctuates and if there are any losses, the Sri Lankan Exit Board will have to take that cost as well. So keeping all of this in mind, let's just hypothetically say that there was such a requirement in the country to purchase be it 100, 200, 300 or even 400 megawatts of power. If we follow the usual procedure of calling for competitive bidding from Sri Lankan companies, the cost would be around 16 billion rupees. However, with the current scenario of purchasing oil from Turkey, the cost would be more than 30 billion rupees. So with that in mind, I'll raise two questions. Question number one, we know that the Sri Lankan Exit Board has over 1,000 engineers, or rather very qualified 1,000 engineers. Why couldn't these engineers who are very qualified, who would have the facts and figures, predict if such a requirement would be required early in January, be it 100 or 200? Such a requirement was not brought forward. Question number one is that. Question number two is, we are experiencing a rainy condition in some of the areas right now, and we have heard that there are the major plants in the country are working fine and seems not to be broken. So how or rather can the cabinet declare a national calamity? So just because Turkey or any country writes a letter to Ravi Karnayaka and states that they want to buy power, can this be done?